Welcome back to Meet the Candidates. We are here talking to Republican candidate for the 4th Massachusetts District, David Rosa. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Brett. I greatly appreciate it. And God bless Donald J. Trump. So now that I've said that, I can continue with the interview, sir.
Let's talk about your background first. We'll get into all that, but we'll talk about your background because I think people deserve to know where you came from, what your experiences are. You served in the military, which thank you very much for serving. I think that everyone can agree that those that serve our country definitely deserve a big thanks for the sacrifices that you've made. 22 years that you served. It was 13 in the Air Force, and then you also served in the National Guard. Tell me about your experience.
Yeah. Well, I did grow up in an Air Force family, and my father retired in '65. And years later, that sort of thing sticks with you. And growing up somewhere close to a flight line and jet fighters taking off makes an impression. So it was always in the back of my mind that, maybe one day I could somehow or another get, closer to the Air Force again. And eventually it did happen. So I was very thankful, and it was great to be a part of the Air Force. So I had the privilege of being a part of the Air Force's Acquisition Corps, which probably most of the audience knows nothing about, but it's sort of the corporate Air Force. And we go, it's the business of research, development, and production and deployment of weapon systems. It can be aircraft, it can be radar, it can be a lot of different things. But I had the good fortune of working on some very, very large programs and some high technology programs of the day. And one of which is phased array radar that's just sitting out on Cape Cod, hopefully giving us some warning before intercontinental ballistic missile arrives, so we have a chance to run in our basement for all the good it's going to do. But anyway, so that would be an example. And one of the other programs I was in charge of, as a matter of fact, was what they call the air traffic controller simulation system. So as you might imagine, we have air traffic controllers at all of our airports and at, of course, Air Force stations around the world. And they need to be trained. And so we came up with a way to train them for different locations, because they might get reassigned on short notice. They might have a new assignment coming up. And so we wanted to be able to introduce them to that operational environment. So we did come up with a air traffic control simulator with big screens in a room, and I was sent, of all places, to sort of get familiar with this. They sent me to Disneyland because if you haven't noticed, there's a lot of big simulators there. So and of course this was years ago, but anyway, so I thought that was curious. So it shows the Air Force is broad-minded and will reach wherever they have to get good examples. So we did build those and we deployed them, and so we ran into a small problem. Not to take up your time with this, but sometimes you go to deploy a system, and the receiving base is sometimes doesn't embrace the concept. So I let it be known that we only had a limited number, and somebody might not get theirs if there was a lack of cooperation, because if we sent a team there to install it and they weren't ready to receive, they were going to move to the bottom of the list. And I apologize to the United States Air Force, but that worked. And so when we sent a team to install it, they made darn sure they were ready, and it got installed. So I hope air traffic controllers in the Air Force have benefited by that, and maybe they've got the new, better version, I'm sure, some years ago. Anyway, so my father retired, went to Fall River, where I spent my formative years. And I grew up there. I had a paper route. I got part-time jobs, washing dishes in restaurants, mopping the floor, pumping gas at gas stations, worked in a mill for a little while. So I had, a lot of experience that a lot of other people in this district would have had, working their way up the chain. And so I know what that's like. And later on, I attended a vocational high school, which many people today, it's a very big topic about vocational training. Not everybody needs or wants to go to college. And by the way, they go to these vocational schools, they learn trades, and they go out there, and they're very happy, and they make good money, and it supports their family, helps them get into their first house. So it's all great stuff. I've lived through it. So, it's something I understand. And unbeknownst to me, it was in the cards that I would go on to college. So I went to the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, like many others have. So again, a very, common, an experience that many families have a member go or somebody, went. And I got my Bachelor of Science degree. And then I was able to go in the Air Force officer training program. Well, no one was more shocked than me. So I went on and happily made some good friends, even to this day, and was able to spend some, 13 years in the Air Force, and worked on big programs where I started, and, got into, very important defense contractors here in the state of Massachusetts, up in Lynn, up near Concord and Lincoln, Raytheon, and right here and locally in Taunton for what was then the Mobile Subscriber Unit, a $3 billion program. I'm sure the Taunton area was very happy to have that. So, I've lived that life, the acquisition officer, where you're, involved in everything from the, what is the threat? What do we think are the solutions? We call in defense contractors and others, and we ask them, what is your best guess? And let's go explore some solutions. And then we let a contract, and we go through development, design, engineering, production. So this sort of wealth of life experience arms you, I would think, when you go into Congress and they say they want a big program or a big budget on something, or they have a defense program coming up, or they want to spend a lot of money on anything, you begin to look at it through that perspective. And, my opponent was a hospital administrator, and God bless hospital administrators. We need them. We love them. That's great. It's a different perspective on the world. It's a different life experience. I think I bring a much broader experience and lived through that. So I think that's part and parcel of what prepares me to be someone who can look at programs at the congressional level that would affect the district, maybe the state, maybe the nation, and see the value in them, and maybe where they need a little tweaking to be done properly, and have that ability maybe to have the interaction with defense contractors and government officials who are going to oversee those contracts. So I think that's all valuable stuff. And growing up the way I did in a working class family, I think I have a pretty well developed sense of the struggles in life and fair play and what's good for people and what's good for the nation.
David, you took that experience too when you were out of finally leave the military. 2014, you run Parks and Rec for Dighton as well. You joined that as well. You became a civil servant. You decided that you wanted to continue serving your community. Yeah. Tell me about that experience, some of the things that you did in the town of Dighton.
All right, let me clean up the picture a little bit. So I was a civil servant. After I left the Air Force, I became a civil servant, still in the acquisition corps, and had that life experience. Eventually, in my part-time, I joined, or I was elected to, the Parks and Recreation Commission here in my hometown of Dighton. And so that was sort of my real life introduction to government and the mechanics of it and the controls and sort of the budget and the timing and the cooperation, not only with other commissioners, because there was 3 of them. And today I'm the chair, and I'm in my 3rd term. And so that's all very good. And I encourage, particularly younger people, anybody of any age can go and do this. Most towns have some committee or commission or something that they can serve on. And sometimes it just requires that you ask the Board of Selectmen if you can serve on an open space. on some committee. And frequently it isn't a very complicated process to get that done. And so go there with an open mind, your ears open, pay attention. And it's a great place to listen and learn and begin to practice the mechanics of governance and government at the hometown level. And that is a very good model for what happens at the state level and the federal level. There has to be budgets, there has to be cooperation, there has to be give and take. And so I think all of that I bring to it as well. And as maybe you're going to mention, or we're going to mention, we're talking about that eventually gets to the point where if you're unhappy with something, the real answer isn't go complain. The answer is, well, what brought us here? Is it a law? Does the law need to be changed? Many laws you can craft, as I am going to bring an example for it here in a second, a modification of law. Maybe we don't want to do away with the whole law. Maybe we just want to modify it. And then it's good enough for what we're doing or what many towns are doing. So the example with me is I looked at 40B, and I felt 40B was defective in a lot of ways. And so I drafted a proposed change to 40B. I went to my state rep, which is the proper procedure. You go to your state rep and you bring them your draft, and no matter how sort of rough stage it's in, and hopefully that state rep is good enough, kind enough to help you polish it up and then bring it to the State House. That's the system we have. That's what's supposed to work. And I encourage people, complaining is great. Being a little more proactive and learning about the law that has sort of brought you to whatever that point is, and seeing if you can change it as opposed to delete it or add another one. So, and by the way, that 40B law, I had heard both from the Democrats and the Republicans. We've been trying for a long time to change it. No one succeeded. I was even chastised by one of them who claimed that, where was I 40 years ago? Why didn't I work on it then? Well, I was a young person doing something else in life. Why didn't you fix it? But anyway, if you were Johnny on the spot 40 years ago. So anyway, so I looked at their efforts, both on the Republican side, conservatives, if you will, and the Democrat side, and I realized, so my modification was to change it so that the modification applied to cities and towns below 30,000 people in population. Now the big cities didn't have a dog in the fight. They may have a different reason for defending 40B planning, but a lot of the cities and towns, or particularly smaller towns, find it a tremendous burden because a 40B program can come in and it has this nice name of affordable housing, which if you live in Massachusetts is pretty much a nonsensical term. What does that mean? Affordable housing, that's a house someone else can buy, but I don't know. So but it has some very real problems built into it. They can essentially change your population, not virtually overnight, but almost overnight, in that a contractor comes in and builds X number of units, and that brings in folks. And of course, now there's a greater demand on water, demand on the traffic, demand on the schools, demand on a variety of things, the infrastructure, whatever you want to, all variety of things. And the state says you cannot hold up a 40B for any of those reasons. That town, like Dighton, simply has to take the whipping and like it. And I think that's the wrong sort of government to have. So I wanted to, now when I crafted this, I said, look, there's going to be some towns that really like 40B, right? But here's the thing of it. I said, well, in there, if you have 70% of your population that registered voters who come out and vote for it, then you've got it. You've got your 40B, right? Now, that's quite a test, don't you think? That because get 70% of a population of anything to do anything at the same time is a challenge. However, what it does is that means the contractor is going to have to present something that's very valuable to the town and to the people of the town. That puts them in a tremendous negotiation position, which I think they should be in. And now the people have control. not dictates from the governor's office or whomever, or some mystical administration that demands thus and so of us. So those are, I'm sorry, I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but I just wanted to sort of give people a sense of, we can take these things and look at the parts and make the changes that work for us and leave things in place that work for other people. So, and moving away from that one size fits all thing, let's tailor it a little bit.
David, obviously you're very passionate about the work that you've done, and you're passionate about the work that you're looking to do going forward. Let's talk about some of your policies. You started this interview just right away saying, God bless Donald Trump. Tell me about your thoughts on the president, because obviously when we spoke on the phone prior to this, it was also something you felt very strongly about. Tell me about what you think about that.
Well, I hope that folks look back in time a little bit at what happened before that. We had an economy that was in trouble, and it was a long struggle. It was an 8, 9, 10-year battle to drag us out of that, and that's really set the stage for people to be receptive to Donald Trump. And remember, he came out of the business world, and he saw things happening nationally and globally that many of us felt. We knew something was wrong. And we knew that we needed somebody to take us out of this. And that's why Donald Trump was embraced across the country. Now, is Donald Trump, does he say everything just right so he's your cup of tea? Well, maybe not. But I know one thing, until we got to COVID-19, this country really turned around. And we started to bring home business and industry, which we need to do. And we started to address a lot of international relationships were completely out of control. And some relationships came into being that were there, they were there simply for the asking, which Donald Trump just went to some of these national leaders and say, well, what's been going on here? And they literally said no one had ever asked them. And I said, my God, how can, any previous president, find fault with that? And so it's a business relationship between the United States and that country that we need and they need, and it's welcome in both places. All right, so the others didn't see it. And so that's one of the merits of somebody like Donald Trump and his background. Now, we need Donald Trump going forward because 4 years isn't enough. We need to keep changing these things. And in the process of it all, we've seen the deep, dark, dirty, rotten, corrupt state be dragged out into the light of day. And that's gonna, we all need that. And we knew deep down inside something was wrong. And thank God it's being brought out. I mean, I remember Ruby Ridge, the event at Ruby Ridge. I remember Waco, Texas, and some of the players and how it happened. And I remember some of the other events. And you look at it and you go, why did that happen like that, right? I mean, my time in the Army National Guard and then being deployed overseas as a part of Operation Iraqi Freedom, people knew something was wrong. And here we are going into Iraq when I think 15 or 16 of the guys on the planes that went into the towers were Saudis. Hey, look, I signed up, I'll do the job. But I hope somebody understands where they're taking us, right? So we went and we did that, and hopefully the world is a little bit safer for it. And I hope these young people, I mean, if they don't remember 9/11, they really owe it to themselves and really to the rest of us to put that film on.
One of the other policies that you talked about before, again, with me on the phone, was you were pro-life, and the way that you put it was a right to life. Can you tell me about that thought?
Right. So, by the way, I don't want to speak for my opponent, but I want to advise folks that I am hearing that there's some flip-flopping going over there, but there's no flip-flopping going on here. I am pro-life, and I am right to life, which is even more. When that baby's born, it has a right to life, and I will work on legislation or whatever, that child's life is to be protected no matter the circumstances, when it arrives and it's alive, it's to be protected. And so that's the slight difference, but a meaningful difference between being pro-life and right to life. So being pro-life, that's great, but you got to make that leap to right to life. So we got to protect our children. I mean, Black Lives Matter. Well, it's a great slogan, but have they ever? For people who put out that sign, please revisit the number of Black abortions that there have been. And then if you can still put that sign in your front yard, I don't know how you get there. And then that gets us back. I'm sorry, I don't want to stray off what you brought up. What's our real differences here between me and the Democrats? And I lament the days of the old true blue Democrat, where there was some fine tuning on the differences. And the question of unions might come up. Oh, okay, so we got to make some changes there or whatever. Today, the differences are huge. They are embracing a philosophy that is Marxist and communist, and I have really devoted most of my adult life to defeat communism and to keep it in check and to see people embracing it and thinking that they want to bring it home. It's stunning. It's unacceptable. So that is the great giant difference between me and every one of the Democrats running. Eventually, if I'm fortunate, I'll face off against one of them. But they're all are carbon copies of one another. And my question is, why is that? Are they on that same note? And I think it's very bad for America. I don't know, maybe I don't know really how to explain this sort of dramatic difference. Let's take the example of guys out in the wilderness and he has to build a shelter for himself and he has to do a little garden and grow some food and he hunts and whatnot. And so he's essentially, trying to make himself self-sufficient, and maybe 2 or 3 other people come out in the general area and they're working and they do likewise. And maybe every once in a while they say, hey, I've got a problem. Johnny lives over on the other hollow or down 8 miles away. Can you help me with, and he voluntarily comes over and he helps him, right? But now, so here's the great difference. A communist comes in and says, you all have to help each other build the house, right? Well, the communist, if he was out in the woods by himself, would he build his own house? Well, he'd have to. Why does all of a sudden his philosophy suddenly have to take over everybody's life, right? That's so if it's just rugged individualism, they're out doing for themselves and they cooperate voluntarily based on their understanding of their neighbors, right? They don't have somebody holding a gun to their head. But communism can only work when they can go into a crowd of people and literally put a gun to their head, whether it's a tax gun or literally a gun, and say, you will pay this tax and you will do as we say. So freedom vanishes. They use the tax gun to enslave us all. So I don't know if I'm really expressing it correctly, but it's a giant change. And if you want to see where it's not worked, look to the Soviet Union, which has collapsed. Look to China, which has had to modify it heavily. Look to Venezuela, which has happened there. And by the way, I have relatives in South Africa. I can tell you from what they've relayed to me, what a mess that's become. And you know what? It becomes a mess because voters do not go and vote. They do not take their obligation as a citizen seriously. They do not really believe what's at risk. And it is. In Venezuela, this guy takes over. He has guys that he imposes a curfew at night. He puts guys on motorcycles. One guy's driving, the other guy has a machine gun. And if you're out at curfew, they don't bother to ask you your name or politely tell you to go in at night or have a conversation with an Antifa guy. They open up with that machine gun. And I'm telling you, this is what happens. And this is what happens with communist governments. It's not a conversation. It's the application of force without regard to humanity. So please, ladies and gentlemen, let's not go there. It's going to be bad. And this is the right place for it.
You've brought up a couple times now the thought of guns. Obviously, gun control is a huge issue, or I should say a huge topic of discussion right now going forward. You're pro Second Amendment and you are pro Constitution. Tell me about your thoughts on gun control and that process.
Right. Thank you very much. So the people way smarter than me designed the Constitution. And so they had years of experience dealing with tyrants. I mean, they grew up under English kings, and they were brilliant men and had their own experience in the new America. And they understand human nature very well. And so they crafted and they debated and on infinitum, much more than most of us would ever care to, and constructed a constitution to try and keep tyrants in check and human nature in check. And so we have a good document, and it's an agreement that different states agree to come together to form the United States. If you throw it out the window, what do you open the door to? By way of example, it sounds a little silly, but who's to say Texas finds out the Constitution doesn't apply anymore and they're free to do as they please? Maybe they want to invade New Mexico. How do you know? Sounds ridiculous, right? How do you know what you unleash? How do you know some foreign powers don't come over and make an agreement with Oregon? And then they spread the Chinese army now as a foothold in what used to be the United States. So we need the Constitution. Now, in the Constitution, they have freedom of speech and they have the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is the citizen's veto right to tyranny. It is not a hunting permit. It is not permission to shoot a burglar. That's just a happy circumstance of having the Second Amendment. Not that I want people shooting people who are trespassing on their property. Please don't, please let's be careful. But that is its true value, is that the citizens can take action to defend the action of a tyrant. And COVID-19 gives us a glimpse of what tyrants can do when they're unleashed under almost any circumstance. So
that's one of the important things, and I'll let you continue because I just wanted to jump in. That's one of the important things so I was a history major. One of the important things of the Constitution that I always looked at was the Constitution is not your rights to defend yourself against your neighbor. It's your rights to defend yourself against a tyrannical government. And that's how it was written. And so a lot of people like to compare your gun rights to, say, me owning an assault rifle to defend myself against you. That's not the truth. It's your right to own a gun to defend yourself against a tyrannical government. It's your ability to, all the amendments, every amendment is written so that it's your protection against the government that is there in place. Your First Amendment is your ability to protest the government. Your Second Amendment is to defend yourself against the government. The Third Amendment is there to protect yourself from having them put soldiers in your home. Those are the things that were there. And if you go back to your history, that's literally why those amendments were written. That's why they're written in that order, because those were the important amendments for defending yourself against a tyrannical government. So I'll let you continue, but that for me is always the point that I always look at as well.
Yeah, well, amen. You're a history major. That's, very important. So thank you for that. So, I mean, right now we already have heard words from Antifa about they don't like who's living in a certain house and they want to take that house over. So we're, and if they're in the Antifa ranks, that, as far as I'm concerned, is the equivalent of foreign troops. And right away, they want to, imagine that, literally throw you out of your house or move into it with you. And if you ever watched Dr. Zhivago, didn't you see that happen somewhere in the course of that movie? And if they can move foreign troops or agents of the tyrant into your home, then that immediately means you cannot have those private discussions as part of your organization or part of your getting yourself together to respond to a tyrant. So, oh, by the way, I have a little good news. Very, very recently, like the other day, some high level in New Bedford, Antifa, very radical people, leaders of the Antifa movement in there were arrested. And they were, the serious charges. The third one got away. There's a warrant, and hopefully we'll catch up with them. Sorry, I'm straying off the campaign trail, but good news for all of us law-abiding citizens. Our good police officers are rounding up some of the bad actors, and they are bad actors, and I know I've done a lot of work on the street, and I've encountered them. So I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
No, absolutely. So one of the things that we talked about was the political philosophies going forward. And one of the points that you're actually making is that there's two political philosophies. There's the philosophy of keep what we got because it's working and it's good versus the burn it down and rebuild it completely philosophy. And you're saying that there's an argument right now that's the real philosophies that we're looking at as we're going into this election. That's do I have it right? That's pretty much what we're going into, right?
Right. I take fundamentally the position, let's keep what we've got. And I think I covered an excellent example. Look at the law you're unhappy with. If it can be modified, let's work on a modification, right? Work within the system. Work with what we've got. It's now imagine the Attorney General from the state of Massachusetts, in hearing some of this discussion, responds with, well, sometimes you have to burn down a forest to grow a new one. Outrageous. Completely unacceptable, and how irresponsible. She has no business being the Attorney General for the state of Massachusetts, in my opinion. But they're essentially, we can look at other nations and see what happens with socialist, communist, Marxist regimes. Now, essentially, their position is, if I can give another example, they want to give us all a blood transfusion by draining all the blood out of us. Come back 10 minutes later and put in new blood. It's too late, right? So that's their philosophy. That's what they're trying to get us to buy. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm arguing for let's keep what we've got. It's worked very well. We're not perfect. I'm not sure anybody can design a government that's perfect. And let's make reasoned, rational, fact-based decisions in its modification. Let's remember, here's one of the acid tests, if you will. What's more important, your feelings or the Constitution? If your feelings are more important, you need to get back to understand what it is why people cooperate, because they've come to an agreement under which terms they will agree to cooperate. That, again, is the strength of the Constitution. It is the basis of an agreement for people on this continent to work together. Very powerful, very important. We all need it. Believe me, laws can be modified, they can be changed, they can be added, they can be subtracted. Don't just act on emotion. Come in and do a rational analysis and see what can be done. Let's work with the system that we have.
One of the things that we talked about is economic upheaval. Is the actual when you were talking about that, it was that citizens are being taxed out of their towns, which I think in a lot of Massachusetts, people can certainly look around and say that is definitely happening to people as we're going forward. One of the suggestions that you have is that people over 65 plus should no longer be taxed on their houses, on their residential. Tell me about this process. Tell me about the things that led you to this decision.
Right. So basically, we have property taxes to pay for a number of things, our local government, state government, whatever. But one of the biggest parts of that is to pay for the school system, which, that's great and fine. And the argument for that is that, well, you went to school and somebody paid for that, and so you should be willing to pay for the school that somebody else is going to go to. And I see the wisdom and the thought behind that. However, given that we have and I think it is tied to it somewhat, completely abandoned any thought of fiscal conservatives, either at the town level for the most part, the city level for the most part, and certainly for the state level, as far as I can tell. I'm sorry, maybe I missed something. And even the federal government has gone way down this path. So, where's the brake pedal? Well, right now there isn't one. So let's look back at this property tax. All right, so somebody paid for me, and maybe they had to pay their whole life. Maybe some locations, they don't have a property tax after, say, 85 or 80, I don't know. But I would be an advocate of looking at and evaluating. Somebody hit 65, I think they've paid I'm going to take the position that they've paid their fair share for the school or whatever. They paid for their children and probably for their grandchildren for the most part at that point. And so then now I think there's a good argument to be made for turning off the property tax on that property owner who is 65 or 70 or 75. We'll find a number that works. But that certainly would be a brake pedal. One of the things it would do is the cities and towns would go, whoops, maybe we have to be a little more careful on our spending. And the other thing is the people that are putting children in the school systems might want to stop and give some thought to, well, wait a minute, how big is that new school you want to build? How fancy is it? And they don't have to look far. There's any number of towns, cities and towns in this district. You go look at the new high school. And if you don't compare that to the Taj Mahal, then, maybe you're not looking at the right high school. But they are big and fancy. I'm not against that, but you're going to be a lot more deliberative in your desire to embrace that if you find out that you can't make a tax slave out of senior citizens, which, by the way, right here in this hometown, the seniors got together and said, my property taxes, it's killing me. So the town, run by Democrats, in every way, mind you, except for me, but that's okay. But anyway, and I've learned a great deal from them. So their answer was, well, we're going to arrange for you to come in and do work for the town, and we'll assign a mystical number to the dollar value of the hours, and we'll subtract that from your property tax. So now they've actually made the leap from being a tax slave on paper to actually you showing up and doing the labor for the taxes.
And now, just to be clear, you're on Medfield TV. So the town that you're talking about is Dighton?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm sorry, Medfield. I didn't mean to imply anything that's not the case. But in the town of Dighton, we are certainly moving in that direction, and I'm horrified by it. And by the way, it just doesn't happen in this district. It's happening up in New Hampshire, and they are merciless. If you can't pay your property taxes, sell that house and move. And this all gets into the realm of very personal decisions. I ask people to consider them carefully. Figure out where you're going.
So David, I know that this is a very busy time for candidates. It's you have a debate tomorrow. You've had different interviews in the past with other stations. One of the questions, so I only have a couple more questions left for you, but one of the questions I want to ask you is, you've now worked with a lot of access stations. You've worked with access stations. You're here talking to me as an access station. You've talked to other ones previously, and tomorrow you're going on a debate on an access station as well. What's your experience with access stations? And if you win, or I should say when you win, what will be your policies towards access stations as well? Well,
for many of us, the Zoom experience, if you will, was new, and it was a little bumpy, a little awkward, but I think we're sort of getting into it, right? And maybe there's an application for a larger participation by the voters across the town, whatever town you're in. And because if you don't know, I'll tell you that most town meetings are poorly attended. How sad. But so you have a very small group of people who show up and vote to spend the town's money. And it's usually, by and large, it's the same people each and every time. So access television is a great aid probably to everybody, because you're able to see and hear a candidate that you probably would not have that interaction with. I mean, I've been out on the street collecting signatures and whatnot and met quite a few people. But even in that broad experience at the grocery stores and whatnot, I'm still only meeting a small percentage of the voters. Small percentage of them are meeting me. But with this access TV, it's a much broader audience. And now we're getting better at using it to communicate and reach out to the community. And it is certainly a great aid to campaigns. I think it'll be a great aid to voters and to taxpayers everywhere. And I have to say, I want to thank you and what you're doing, and the others. And I'm going to have to say thank you to the League of Women Voters, even though I and a few others may have a little bit of friction with them. Their great value is that they put on something like this and they get everyone speaking. And all right, we'll do better in the future. And so we'll all get better at it, and we'll make better use of it. So that's my experience so far. So thank you.
The last question, most important question of the day, obviously the residents of Medfield, they have a lot of great choices going into this election, but why should they cast their ballot for David Rosa?
Well, the folks who pick up a Republican ballot are I'm gonna ask for their support because I say I'm the real Republican in this. And I've run for this seat in 2016. I'm familiar to a great extent beyond what my opponents are with the district. I think I have a better feel for it. I understand how, there's a lot of differences. And I think I bring something to the party that the folks in Medfield can be very happy with, be proud of, I hope. And I say, now, as an example, when the first day you could pick up your nomination papers, the first minute the door was opened, I was in there picking up my papers. And the staff even commented, they said, wow, Mr. Rosa, you're the first one in. And I said, well, it's important. So I get out there, I worked hard on my signatures. A lot of people don't understand what happened during the COVID-19 process and how it affected the business of getting signatures. And I want to tell you that I worked hard throughout the process. The vast majority of my signatures are wet signatures. That's based on person-to-person contact. And yes, sometimes people wore masks, but I kept working at it. And I think people appreciated that. I was not heavily reliant, like most of the other candidates in this race, on e-signatures. And e-signatures came into being as a result of a court order that was an add-on. That whole decision was an add-on to another reason that people came into court. And I won't mention names because at these meetings, in the past few, I've been asked not to mention, I'm not allowed to mention any names of any candidates in any office. So I'll refrain from that. But somebody walked in there and asked the court for relief from the number of signatures required. If you're running for U.S. Senate, it was 10,000. If you were running for Congress, it was 2,000. And they wanted relief for existing campaigns. So they got their relief because they said the state legislature was too busy, even though they were in session. And, the Democrats weren't going to, roll over on that one because it was made life a little easier for some Republicans. I think that's what they were thinking. But that individual who walked in there brought with him several Democrats, and they didn't have campaigns. But when the number of signatures was dropped, and they could use these signatures, it breathed life into campaigns that didn't exist. So the court was, in my opinion, kind of bamboozled into allowing something that they were not asked to allow when they walked in the courtroom. So that, I work at it, and I'm not afraid to go meet the people under whatever the circumstances. I have, where others were afraid to go out there during this thing and meet people, and I'm 66, I'm at risk, but I think I did it for America.
Well, thank you so much, David, for joining us today. People can go to your website, davidrosaforcongress.com. Go ahead.
No, or you're welcome to call me I don't mind. I love phone calls, 774-526-4775. And, if you don't get an answer right away, try again. I will do my best to get back to you. And that's all part of constituent support, taking care of the constituents, taking care of the state, taking care of the nation. That's what I want to do as your congressman. I ask for your vote and your support on September 1. Thank you.
That is a bold strategy, giving your cell phone number out like that. I love them. I think that's great. That's fantastic. You're a man of the people. Going out, seeing the people, giving them your cell phone number. They can call you directly. That's fantastic. Again, thank you so much for joining us. The residents of Medfield and the residents of the Mass 4th District have a tough decision ahead of them, but you certainly have given a great reason for them to vote for you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of Medford.